What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jason Fladlien. You can find him at rapidcrush.com and also his name, jasonfladlien.com. Jason, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since Jason is, I consider one of just a direct response master, some other direct response legends I've had on the podcast, Joe Sugarman was on. He sold millions of pairs of blue blockers through direct response. Brian Kurtz, that's actually, Jason spoke at the Brian Kurtz event that I was at. Brian sent billions of direct mail pieces out. Ron Popeil was another interesting one. Sold billions of product through infomercials, the infomercial king. So if you've heard, but wait, there's more, that's Ron Popeil. Tony Horton was a good one, P90X, and many more. So check those out at InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is actually brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And we do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. So Jason, we call ourselves the magic elves that are running the background to make it look easy for the host so they can create amazing content and create amazing relationships and focus on running their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships, and I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Jason Fladlien, and he's sold over $250 million worth of products to over 150,000 customers in over 131 countries. And based on his strategic initiatives, his company, Rapid Crush, holds the record for all-time biggest launch in internet marketing space, 57.9 million to be exact, Jason, if I have my numbers correct, as well as the record for most commissions generated as an affiliate in a product launch, which was $9.8 million in 8 days. What some people accumulate not even in their lifetime, actually. So Jason is also the only marketer Zoom brought in to teach its user base how to create high-converting webinars, which makes sense, Jason, because that makes their service stickier. So I'm sure there's other companies that should be hiring you as well. But Jason, thanks for joining me.
Jeremy, it is my pleasure to be here today.
You know, I also want to point out, you can check out his book, One to Many, The Secret to Webinar Success. This is the OG version. I don't know if that's the new version on your desk there. Jason, if you want to hold it up for a second. Someone told me this, Jason, I don't know if this is true, but when they're selling books, I don't know if it's Chandler Bolt, that if you hold up the book and they could see it, it sells more. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the newer version of One to Many. And what I love about books is Jason poured his heart and soul into this, and people paid $5,000 a head to be at an event, and now you could buy it in a book. And I don't know, how much is this book? It's like
$10 on the Kindle version.
$10, like that's ridiculous, right? You should make it $1,000 a book just because. But let's start off talking about the origin of the book, which was a $5,000 Genius webinar event.
Yeah, it's a good story. It was about 2017, and I had been doing webinars since 2008, which makes me a dinosaur on the internet. I'm like your grandpa. Back in my day, when we used to do webinars, we had to put 2 tin cans together with a piece of string. And I never taught this stuff, really. I did it. And occasionally I'd publish little guides or booklets that people would pick up and use them. So one of the people that picked them up and used them was Russell Brunson. And it really kind of shaped how he launched what became ClickFunnels with some of the strategies that he learned, what I taught on a webinar. Like one of the things I learned early on selling software on a webinar is you don't sell the software, you make the software a bonus if they buy like an educational product. And when you change it that way, it completely changes everything. And so they did that with ClickFunnels, and it became really big. And Russell wrote a book called Expert Secrets, which he told me one day in an Uber, he said was inspired by me. because I was teaching people how to shift belief patterns. That's a big part of what we do on webinars. So he wrote this book. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And then people got to know me through Russell and through the techniques that I had shown him and that he had modeled and used. And so people started coming at me like that. So I'm like, I better start teaching this stuff formally because I was using it. I wasn't really teaching others how to use it. And I was going after typically beginner markets, startups. I wasn't teaching seasoned veterans. So my audience didn't want to learn how to do webinars. They wanted to learn how to sell products on Amazon. And we're really good at that. So we used webinars to sell people on Amazon training programs, software, et cetera. So I finally one day was like, I want to teach the methodology of how I do webinars, but I don't have the audience for it. But my friend, Joe Polish, who runs Genius Network, I developed a really good relationship with him. And I'm like, he's got the audience. So I'm like, dude, you got the audience. I got the training. Let's partner on it together. You put it in front of your audience. We train at your facilities in Phoenix, and I'll do the rest of the work. It's a hell of a pitch, by the way. I do all the work. We split the profits. Good pitch. And
well, you're
said,
good at
yes.
pitching, so I have no doubt.
Yeah. So we could fit 73 people in that room. So we did a webinar to sell the webinar training. And we sold 73 people at $5,000 a pop. So it's a nice little payday. Now, my plan was to use that to create the recordings from that and then sell the training for like $1,500. So here's a little secret for anybody listening. It's called price anchoring. If people over here paid $5,000 for it, and you can get almost the same thing over here for $1,500, you're not looking at how much it costs you. You're looking at how much it can save you. The real trick is doing it in a way where both people are happy, where you don't disappoint one audience at the expense of another one. So some people were like, I need it now, and I'm willing to pay a premium for it to be in the room. And then other people later on were like, oh, I would rather just buy it, or maybe they didn't hear about it. So you get paid to create the product. That's how we did it. And we had some of the most world-class people that are in that room, and it still blows my mind to this day that actually attended live. So like John Benson, who is pretty much the inventor of the ugly VSL that sold billions through that methodology. He was there learning how to do webinars. The late, great Sean Stevenson, who was just this really short guy with a really big heart in the personal development space, touched millions of people. He was in that room. Susan Garrett, who was like a dog agility world champion multiple time. She was in that room, and the pitch webinar that we did, Jeremy, to sell the product, her and more than her, but I remember her specifically, I think she sold over $200,000 just from what she learned on the webinar that sold the program to her. So this is another lesson for all of you. Can you make your advertisement so good people could win with just the advertisement without even having to buy the product? So she was in the room as well. And it's like a who's who. If you watch the recordings, you're like, oh, wow, that person was there. That person was there. Perry Belcher and Roland Frazier, who were running, traffic and conversion at the time with Ryan Dice. Ryan wasn't there, but Roland and Perry were there. And Perry since has become a business partner of mine. We run a mastermind now called Driven, which is $30,000 a year. And that's a whole bunch of fun. So we brought all these people in, and it was incredible. And then from that, I sold the course, and then people like Alex Hormozi bought the course, and Alex gave me a testimonial saying it was the single greatest course he ever bought on offer creation. And he's obviously used that, and I've consulted with him since then, and he's just become like the darling of the marketing world, which I'm really excited about, like a proud papa. So people like him bought the course and applied it, and countless others. Some people have made 9 figures from a webinar that they designed from that training program. And I also, Jeremy, at the time, I'm like, a book is the best thing anybody could ever do. A book is your legacy. It will have more impact ultimately than anything else you could create. So I took the same material that was in that training program, and that became this book. And this was written in 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly when. And that's how this book came to be. It was a derivative of the recordings of the thing that I did live in the room, and it has since become pretty much the standard of how everybody who's anybody is doing webinars, which just blows my mind as a small town Iowa boy, former Hare Krishna monk, former rapper, college dropout. Like, to have that impact in the world, it's still surreal to me to this very day.
I want to talk about a lot to unpack there, the advice that Alex Hormozi, what stuck out to him in your conversations of what he implemented. And if you're taking a look, there is, if you listen to the audio, there's a video version. We're on Jason's website here. So if you think he's joking, there is a picture of him here as a monk. And I actually scoured the internet a little bit, Jason, to see if I could find you rapping. I maybe didn't dig deep enough, but I wanted to find something on there. What did Alex Hormozi take? What did he say that was impactful for him?
Yeah, he's quoted me very generously in his book, which is nice because I oftentimes do not get the credit out there. By the way, I'll take the money or the credit. So if you say, give me the credit or give me the money, just give me the money. I prefer both if I could get it. So he's credited me. I believe I am the most quoted person in his book, $100 million Offers, which is the best-selling book on the subject. And Alex is very intuitive on honing in on the few things that matter the most. So he was able to take I taught it under the framework of webinars, and he was able to extract that and apply it in general in business, period. The other thing, if you notice in almost all of Alex's keynotes in his trainings, one of the things that he does there's two major things that you'll see him do over and over again. One of those is he always presents a roadmap. He'll say, these are the 4 things we're going to do. Then he teaches the first thing, then he checks it off. Now we're on the second thing and he checks that off. And that's something that I've taught. And this is really important, regardless of whether it's webinars or not, is people need to know where they're at, where they've been, and where they're going to contextualize all the information that they give. And if they do that, then they learn, and it's easier for them to understand. In bonus points, it's easier for you to create the content too. Now, again, interestingly enough, because I'm the pioneer that's breaking the trail to try to figure out the Wild West here, I was applying that really only to webinars. And then Alex takes that and applies it and turns it into keynotes. He turns it into YouTube content and other valuable things. The other thing that you'll see Alex will use a lot of the same transitions again. And oftentimes they are word for word replicas of the transitions that I've written in this book here and that I teach to people. You'll find, at least I've found this to be true. This is so interesting. If you think about it, it makes logical sense. Like if you listen to a comedian, the punchline to the joke is like one sentence, but the setup to the joke could be minutes. So the setup is actually more important than the payoff. And that's true when you make an offer. And that's true when you're training as well. And so I spent a lot of time on these transitions where I'm transitioning from, say, teaching to selling, or I'm transitioning from one point to another. I spend a massive amount of time to the point where I've really got very precise on the language patterns that allow that to happen as easy as possible. And so oftentimes you'll see a lot of language patterns that Alex and many other people use are the language patterns that I've figured out through thousands of hours of being on live webinars with real people trying to decide whether they should buy the product or not.
What's an example, Jason, of when you're talking about transitions?
Yeah, so I'll give you the most common one that I have that people model from what I've taught. So it's a real dilemma when you go from education to selling on a webinar. People oftentimes feel very uncomfortable doing that. Like they feel like it's a bait and switch, the presenter does. Or they're usually really comfortable, like experts are really comfortable at the education portion and not so comfortable at the selling portion. And that's really tough for them to make that transition. And what I try to do is create a transition that puts the presenter in the most comfortable state to then start pitching, at the same time make the audience most receptive to hearing the message. Because if you think about it from this perspective, if it's the right person who you had in mind when you created the product, then they're supposed to buy it. Like it would be tragedy if they didn't buy the very thing that is tailor-made exactly for them precisely. And so we want to get around that. We don't want them to not buy something that would cost them more money to say no to than to say yes to. So the transition that I taught people is what we call the 2 choices transition, where you can say, I'm faced with 2 choices. I could send you on your way and hope and pray that somehow all by yourself, left to your own accord in the dark wilderness, all alone, that you could make a go at this. And if that was the only option, it would be a worthy ideal to pursue. But there's another choice. What if we could together work on this? What if I could be accountable for your success? What if I could arm you with every resource and advantage that I could possibly give you to help influence your outcome and be alongside of you every step of the way? If that was an option, would you be interested in hearing about it? And everybody says yes to that. And I freestyle it, but like we literally teach an actual exact word for word that people can use for their transitions these days. Well, all it does is contrast the choices. The choices, you could do it alone with no help from me, or you can listen to something that I've produced that you can spend money with, and I'm giving you the choice. And it's better to have the choice to decide to buy something or not to buy something than to have no choice at all. And when you frame it to somebody, they get it. They say, oh, wow, yeah, I want to hear what you've broke your back on, spending thousands of hours to try to figure out. I want to know what that is. And then you feel really good because you're like, yeah, if I don't sell them anything, I take zero active responsibility in their outcome. But if I sell them something, I also have to be accountable to them to some degree. I better deliver something to them. I better have support surrounding to them. I have a more vested interest if I sell you something to see to your outcome. And everybody wants that. Everybody wants to buy something. They just want to buy the thing that's right for them, that gets them far more value than what they invest in. So when you frame that transition so they understand that. I'll give you another one real quickly here. Everybody's all freaked out about price all the time. Presenters are very nervous about prices and how they sell on price. And so one of the ways that they'll do it is they'll try to minimize price. And they'll act like it's not a big deal. Or they'll somehow try to justify it. And that's okay. That's not bad. But instead, I try to go out there and say, listen, this is going to hurt a little bit when you make this investment. It's going to be a stretch for you. And it's not going to be an easy pill to swallow. It's going to be a lot. However, when you make this investment, and now we're selling, so the transition there is framing it as, yeah, it's a significant investment. And yeah, it's going to hurt to do it. Should you do it anyway, though? And so that transition it's one that I use all the time almost. My favorite time to use it, by the way, Jeremy, when it's not that significant of investment. I build it all up and then they find out it's only $500 or whatever. They're like, dude, you're crazy, man. This thing is a steal. And I'm like, all right, I guess you're right. But I'm always trying to frame the price as, yeah, it's super expensive and it's still worth it, versus most people, they're transitioning where they don't even want to acknowledge that they're the premium version of what they have. And then they're using the standard kind of communication that anybody would use to sell anything. So to me, the transition is, how do we position this thing so when somebody hears it, it has the most impact? And so the transition is the most powerful way when you go from content to selling, and also the transition when you go from price to value or value to price. You should really think about those, how you switch from one point to another, because you can set them up in ways where people are now eager and excited to know, versus if you don't set them up, then they're very passive. They'll listen to you, but they won't really absorb it.
You do something, Jason, also, people can be awkward with selling from the get-go, and you do something in the very beginning of a webinar to get agreement. And that also is two things. Talk about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So when I first started on webinars, I was very uncomfortable with this idea that it felt like I'm tricking my audience. Hey, come to this free thing that out of the goodness of my heart, I'm going to teach you. Psych, buy this product, right? It felt like almost a timeshare pitch. And I was very uncomfortable about that. So I said to myself, how do I reconcile these feelings? Because I realized the webinar is a superior medium of advertisement. Most advertisements, like, I will annoy you, and then hopefully what I sell you will make up for the fact that I just annoyed you. A webinar is like, I will provide value to you, and then you will get an experience of the value I can provide, and then you will want to continue that by investing in the product. So there's value there, but I was still uncomfortable. So I came up with this close very early on, and it would go something like this. And then when I say close, it happens in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the webinar. So it's in the introduction. So I would say something along the lines. I say, I have 2 agendas here today. My first agenda is to sell you a product at the end of this webinar. I just flat out tell them, right? My first goal here today is to get you to buy a product that I will offer you. at the end of the webinar. My second agenda is to teach you how to do XYZ. Now, the XYZ, Jeremy, is some ridiculous, what they feel would be impossible for me to show them in 45 to 60 minutes. Some big, bold claim. That's what I'm going to say. So I'm like, I have two agendas. One is to sell you a product. The second is to teach you this thing. If I can teach you this thing in the limited time that we have together, then I insist that you invest in my product at the end of this webinar. However, if I cannot teach you XYZ, then never buy anything that I will ever attempt to sell you ever again. Do we have a deal? And I have many variations of that. But I basically set the framework where I say, if I can do X, then you should buy Y. If I can't do X, please never buy Y. And the audience will agree to that almost 100%. 99% of people will say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. I was looking at a webinar that Tony Robbins did with Matthew McConaughey last year. It was a really gigantic, big webinar, and it did really good. And I'm like, God, it could have done even better if they would have done the technique that we just described, because especially with a major celebrity to a mainstream audience where any type of selling they think is a scam, right? It's even more powerful to be very clear about your motives up front, but frame them in a way so people could understand them. Otherwise, they will assume the worst. So if I don't tell you I'm selling you something, you will assume that I'm trying to trick you or manipulate you or something sneaky is going on. If I tell you up front I'm going to sell you and I can explain it on my terms, then you will be more comfortable. You'll still probably think, yeah, you'll think two things. One, there's no possible way he can teach that. So it's a safe bet for me to agree to that. But number two is like, if he can really do that, yeah, I would want to buy that thing. That thing would sound amazing if he can actually do what he says. And so we changed the whole interaction from yes, I will, or no, I won't buy, to I will buy under these conditions. And that is so powerful. And you do that in the introduction.
And Jason, you've sold things from $17 to $12,000 software on webinars. And I don't know if you do this anymore, but like, let's say someone right now, they're like, yes, I have a big webinar, huge webinar coming out, and I want Jason to audit this webinar. What are the different things that you do now for people?
Great question. Yeah, so we do a lot of consulting. Like I did consulting for Alex Hormozi last year, paid me $25K for a day, where we went through his big book launch. And his plan coming in was completely different than when he left. And there's a huge lesson there, because he came in and he explained what he was thinking to do on that presentation, that live stream that they did. And I completely changed his whole outlook on that, where I'm like, you should be making the offer 30 minutes in. I'm like, you don't have to do the standard formula that most people would do for most of these situations. So I'm always being very hyper contextual to that person, their capabilities, that audience, that market, that time of year, that media. And that's often what we do for clients that can make the big difference when there's big stakes on the line. What I've also discovered with clients, Jeremy, is just because I can do it doesn't mean you should try to do it. So I have sold $12,000, by the way, per year. That's not just a one-off payment. That's a $12,000 a year license to a software on a webinar without sending anybody to a phone call to talk to anybody in person. True one-to-many selling, where I live and die by my ability to close on the webinar itself. And we did that webinar one time, did $3.29 million in 90 minutes without follow-up, without replay, nothing. So it's possible. And so sometimes I used to coach clients on how to do those techniques too. And then I realized, oh, that's ridiculous. It's better to either have them just send them to a phone room and not have the webinar do all the heavy lifting, or maybe we just build a business where we don't have to rely on being that good at webinars in order to do that. So I'm always looking for that with the client to right fit it, because the cost that I paid to be as good as I am at webinars didn't allow me to be better at buying traffic. Like these guys are better at buying traffic than me usually. It didn't allow me to build a team like an army would be. I'm more of like a SEAL Team 6. Like I can't run a platoon, but you give me 6 guys and we'll go kill bin Laden, that kind of thing, right? So I often tell people don't try to even emulate those things. Instead, focus maybe on a front end offer that you could just run in perpetuity and scale that thing over the next 3 to 5 years. What's really great about this, though, Jeremy, is I can take the technique that's really sophisticated that would be required to sell a $12,000 thing, and we can extract that and build a model. So I'll give you a great model. That webinar was done to an audience inside of an audience inside of an audience. And so people think here's why. People think webinars are only to front-end clients who have never bought anything from you ever. And the reason why is because 99% of the webinars you ever see in public are in that situation. But by and large, the best webinars you could ever do are to existing customers who've bought a different product from you. And people just don't know that. So the model is more important than the specifics of how we did it in this one instance. But in this one instance, we were like, hey, listen, you can't even come to this webinar unless you've bought this product and this other product. And if you can, and then the webinar we wrote would not make sense to anybody unless they had certain experiences. So normally on webinars, you can't use jargon. I had a consulting client the other day, and he had this thing that was called like B2B e-com method. That was one of the strategies that he was teaching on his webinars. And it was to a front-end customer. And I said, I don't think they know what B2B is, and I don't think anybody really knows what e-com is. That doesn't make, that's jargon. So generally, we eliminate jargon. When you eliminate jargon from a webinar, it's really hard because jargon has a purpose. It encapsulates like 50-word ideas into 2 words. But jargon, nobody knows what it means. Nobody can resonate with it. So we were changing some of his stuff on his webinar to like the virtual showroom because everybody could understand that versus whatever he had. I can't even remember what he had before that. But he had some sort of technical jargony term. And we have to be very general and we have to be very accessible on front-end webinars. But on back webinars, I can use all the jargon I want. In fact, I can build upon the things I've already taught them. And so we're taking gigantic leaps on the webinar when before you'd have to take baby steps so we can cover so much more. So that's the value of a back-end webinar. So oftentimes I advise clients to sell a front-end product that's not a webinar, that opens up as many people as possible to purchase from you, and then build a back-end offer on a webinar that will be perfectly aligned with that front-end thing. Nobody does it. Everybody does the front-end webinar because that's all they see. But the real lesson there, and then I show this to clients all the time, it blows their minds. And the other one I show to clients all the time is if one webinar is good, 2 webinars are better. So oftentimes people think in order to write a new webinar, I need a new product or a new offer. But some of my best webinars are I wrote a different webinar selling the same product to the same market. So in Amazon, I'd have 3 different webinars that we would use to sell the product we were promoting. Webinar number 1 would be a 4-step process. Here's the 4 steps to be successful on Amazon. You select the right products, you source them correctly, you list them in a certain way, and then you launch them on Amazon. 4-step process. Webinar number 2. Of all those 4 steps, the launching is the most important one. So we would zoom in and focus just on the launch and build a whole webinar around how to launch products on Amazon. That was webinar number 2. Webinar number 3 was essentially, hey, you've seen everything that we've shown to you and you haven't bought yet. So we'll just sit here and figure out if you should buy or not. No content, pure objection smashing webinar for hours on end with a whole bunch of people asking us live questions. And we would use that 3 webinar funnel to produce some of the biggest promotions in the history of the internet, even to this very day. And so these are things often that are non-intuitive that we look at for clients. And then we just figure out of all the tools in the webinar toolkit, do we use the hammer? Do we use the wrench? Do we use the power saw, right? Which one is the right fit for the right job?
Longest webinar you've ever done. And there's also probably a misconception to have a shorter webinar, right? So longest webinar you've done.
14 hours. So here's a good lesson again, Jeremy. So even forget webinars for a second. Think of how we solve problems. So one day, Will and I, my business partner, we were sitting around and we said, how could we have a webinar where all we did was pitch all day long and everybody was happy with it? So most people most people go about solving a problem this way. We can only do X. How do we do it X? So most people say we can't pitch to our audience and just beat the hell out of them up and have a pitch fest. They said we can't do a pitch fest. So how do we sell them without doing a pitch fest? We say, how do we sell them while doing a pitch fest and make them enjoy it? So we challenge the premise, we reverse it, we invert it, and then we say it. And in our minds, we said, well, if we were able to go out and secure products at the biggest discounts ever offered for those products and hook these customers up with these insane deals, like almost like a home shopping network for digital marketing business products. And if we could agree with the person that the only time we'd ever offer this deal was live on the webinar, so they would feel safe giving us the biggest discount ever. Like, hey, we could only sell this on the webinar kind of a deal. So they would say, okay, cool. I'll give you this product that's normally $2,000. I'll let you sell it for $50 because you can only sell it on the webinar. So nobody will see it unless they were on the webinar deal. And then we go to our audience and be like, if I end this webinar, I'm contractually obligated. I cannot sell you this product ever again. Here's the contract, right? Now the scarcity is really powerful. And so it's a service to stay on a webinar like that until everybody buys every product that they want to buy because they can no longer buy the product after it's over. So we did that for 14 hours one day because we had like 27 different products that we had sourced and got this limited time reseller license to for only the duration of the webinar. And we did it for 14 hours to make sure that everybody saw every product, everybody understood every product, and everybody had the time to purchase the products that they wanted to purchase. And it took 14 hours. And some people started with us when the sun was going down, and they ended with us when the sun was rising the very next day. And we had a lot of fun. So that's the power of how much people will stay and look for good deals, and how much people are appreciative and grateful if you go to great lengths to help them secure things that they otherwise could never get on their own. Now, let's talk about the length of the webinar. Almost inevitably, almost every single webinar that I see, I can increase the conversion of if we just make it longer. And that blows people's minds. I'll have people argue with me, Jeremy, about this concept. My favorite time was when they argue with me in a seminar that they flew halfway across the country to attend on day 2 of the 3-day seminar, where they've already been in the room for 12 total hours, telling me that nobody stays and watches long form content anymore. I'm like, do you see the disconnect with the statement you're making based upon your behavior? You're 25 hours deep into investing in your own knowledge and education, and you're telling me nobody's doing this? What are these things computing with the other thing? So it's generally true. 95% of your audience, they won't even scratch below the surface. However, 5% of your audience can never be satiated. And that 5% of your audience controls 70% of the money spent in your market. So who do you want to cater to? You want to cater to the 95% who won't even throw a nickel your way? Or you want to cater to the 5% who will spend more money than the other 95% combined? That's who the webinar is for. And those people, as long as it's done in a captivating, engaging, dramatic, exciting, and valuable way, they'll always want to know more. But even if you don't change anything about the webinar, there's one way you can make it longer and make it more valuable, and that's you just deal with more objections. So instead of doing 3 price closes, you do 6 price closes. Instead of doing 4 time objections, you do 12 time objections. Instead of doing 1 belief objection or 2 belief objections, you do 19 belief objections. You just sit there and you answer every single possible excuse, big or small, one after the other, that would stop somebody from buying a product who should be buying the product. And here's what's cool about that. The quantity becomes its own quality. So here's what happens. Oftentimes we win buyers for no other reason than the following reason. They say, whoa, every other person who's tried to sell me gave up. You haven't given up on me. Because you are willing to hang in there and try to help me, I will give you my money. Because you've shown to me that you are more committed than anybody else who's trying to help me. So we win customers not by technique, but by demonstration of how committed we are to help them. But you can't say you care about your customers and then give up on them easily. That's not possible. So you either care and you stay, or you don't care. And you can make millions not caring, right? But it's a hell of an advantage if you can demonstrably show you care. And the number one way to show you care is just to hang in there longer than the next person will. And you hang in for a little bit longer and you make a lot more money. And then you can take longer vacations when it's all said and done.
You know, obviously, so consulting, people can get the book One to Many.
Yep.
Can people still buy the course?
We're retiring it now. So at the end of last year, this is funny because I still wasn't convinced. This is back in 2017. The pandemic changed everything. I still wasn't convinced most people even wanted to learn how to do webinars, because I think you have to be somewhat insane to even attempt to do a webinar. You have to be a good public speaker, and everybody's scared of doing that. You have to be an educator, which is not easy. And you have to be a salesperson, which is also very scary. And then there's a lot of moving parts from a technical standpoint. What system are you going to use, and the designing of the PowerPoint, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's email involved in that. Forget about it. One of the reasons it's so valuable is because it requires so many separate skills to be combined together. So I'm like, nah, there's no market for this. I was totally wrong. And especially during COVID, it really changed everything. So when I created that program, I kind of 80-20'd the whole deal. I said, okay, here's the model. I spent, maybe 10, 15 hours on the thing, and then I put it together, and it was a smash hit. And in some ways, there's a lot of value to that. But at the end of last year, a business partner of ours, Dylan Frost, we do the marketing and the webinar and a partnership for his Amazon program. So he hires us to come in and we do all the selling. He creates the products, he brings in the traffic, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice synergistic relationship. And Dylan says to me, he says, hey, listen, if I were to get Jeff Walker to promote a new webinar course that you would create, would you create it? And I'm like, if you get Jeff to do it, then I'll be incentivized to really dig down and create this new program. So he says, cool. So he goes out and he gets Jeff and he books Jeff. And he says, what are we going to name it? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to call it? He goes, let's call it GOAT Webinars. He says, because you're the greatest of all time, Jason. So I said, GOAT Webinars. That sounds really cool. And I said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. So this is what I got working with Alex Hormozi, because Alex said something to me that was very impactful. He says, writing a book the way I write it is 10 times as hard, but it's 1,000 times more valuable. And I said, as I'm getting older here and I've accomplished so much stuff, I really want to do it justice. So here's what I did this time with the program, Jeremy. And I've now learned more about webinars myself in the last 4 months than I have in the last 15 years that I've been doing that. I sat down one day and said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. So I went through 15 years of webinars. And every time I saw anything on any slide from 15 years worth of webinars, either ones I've written for myself or for clients, I made a note. I'm like, oh, that's a cool technique. Oh, that's an interesting method. A lot of this stuff I was doing unconsciously. I wasn't even aware of, right? And so I outlined the whole thing. It took about 150 hours just to audit and go through past webinars. And then I spent another 50 hours organizing the structure and the content. And then because I do my best training live in front of an audience, we invited people to come here to LA. And I trained them in person. Every one of the people in that room was an assassin. Almost every person in that room had already made $1 million or more training them on webinars prior. So we had this killer, awesome, amazing group, small group too. I love intimate groups, just to create the content. So we created it, and it's so damn good. We haven't officially even launched it yet, because when that was done, I stepped back and said, you know what? We really need to do a group coaching program, and we need to really build that out. And we need to teach people, because the course is great and the course is good, especially if you're starting out and you don't have a business that's chugging along yet. Maybe you don't even have a good product yet that you've really refined. You should buy the course. I said, but there's a difference between instruction and implementation. So I'm going to create an implementation program. So I want businesses that are already somewhat qualified. They're already having an offer, probably already have a webinar. So we launched GOAT Coaching, which is where I take that material, that source material that we created from GOAT Webinars, and we broke it out into a coaching program. So we ran the first beta version of it. We just concluded it, and now we just launched and sold out of the second beta. And I'm really excited about it, because every single person we brought through the program so far has seen success. We have a 100% success rate. So I'm really excited about it, because now what I'm trying to do is refine it to the point where I can teach it And even if you know very little about it, you can implement it and benefit from it. So that's kind of the evolution of where I'm at, Jeremy, is I can show you all kinds of amazing, fancy techniques on webinars, but they have very little practical application for most people. And I'm like, okay, forget that stuff. I mean, we'll put it in there and you could follow along with it. But the main emphasis is on how can I teach somebody who's very busy, who doesn't want to learn how to be a black belt in webinars? And how can I have them in 5 minutes understand it, use it, and implement it immediately? And what we're finding is 85% of almost every single webinar, you could literally use the same script for. And that's really interesting to me. But in order to help somebody get there, I got to work 100 times harder just to get that little bit of an extra edge versus just generally teaching people the techniques and then hoping they figure out how to use them.
So where can people find out more about
Yep.
GOAT system, GOAT coaching?
Great question. So it's still so new that I don't have a place to send anybody other than if you go to jasonfladlien.com, go there, opt in to my email list. I have
There's
a little
webinar
PDF
one
there.
sheet there, actually.
Yeah, there's a thing called the 11 Sales Commandments. You can read it or not. I highly recommend you do read it. But if you opt that in there, then you'll be on our email list. Right now, we're literally only promoting it through word of mouth and email via application.
Right here.
Yep. So you have to apply, and then we have to look if you make sense to take it to the program or not. But that'll get you on the email list. And then when we launch the next one, we can do it. I mean, if you're super, super duper serious and you want to jump the line a little bit, then you can support@rapidcrush.com. You can email support@rapidcrush.com. Plead your case there. Eventually, Jeremy, we're going to get it to the point where it is running. I'm not going to be the one coaching it here within the next year. I'm doing it now, but we're going to bring in coaches. We're going to create a training program where I can take my coaches, run them through that. And then we're going to create certification partners to then who are wizards at implementing the GOAT coaching system and then have them build webinars for clients. But that's like a 2 to 3 year initiative. But that's my path now, my friend. My contribution to the universe is to stay solely and specifically in the lane of webinars and just take it to the extreme of value that I can. I mean, I'm already known as the #1 webinar guy on the planet, and I'm already known as the #1 trainer for webinars as well. But I want to do it even better than I've done it. And that's what we're looking forward to for the next decade.
I love it. And first of all, I just love the, you are a master of beta, right? I mean, if you follow Jason's MO and framework, he proves it out, he gets testimonials, and it's not pretty. I think you'd agree with that. In the beginning. It's beta. And there's a scarcity, there's an exclusivity. There's so many lessons in that, I feel, from the beta piece.
Love it. There's actually a close that I use to explain that, Jeremy, because people get confused by that, like when I'm selling them. So I came up with this close, and I call it the Mona Lisa in a brown paper bag. So if I had the Mona Lisa and it was sitting in a warehouse in a dark, dusty corner and it was wrapped in a brown paper bag and I gave it to you, it's still the Mona Lisa. It's still as valuable as ever. It's just not in the art museum. It doesn't have the lights and it doesn't have the fanfare surrounding it. So when I pitch this, it's essentially like, if you're okay with the brown paper bag version of the Mona Lisa, you can get in fast, you can get in early, and you can get the best deal possible. However, it will be bumpy. You know, if we don't have everything organized, I don't even have a members area properly set up. I don't even have a damn name for the program in some instances. Jeremy, I've launched programs that have made million where we literally didn't even have a name for the course. That's the art museum. That's the lights. That's the other stuff that comes later. So the brilliance of launching something like this in beta, and everybody should do this. So some of my best webinars have been launching beta products. It's speed to market, first of all, is so valuable. 4 out of 5 ideas most of us have aren't going to work. It doesn't matter how smart we are. It doesn't matter how good we are. If we're taking big swings and we're really trying to move the needle, 4 out of 5 things you do just won't work. So we want to find out very early what will and what won't work. So we do that quickly. We fail quickly so we can succeed even quicker. The other thing is you never know what is valuable or isn't valuable until it's in somebody's hands and you can see what they do with it. So I could spend all night and day trying to figure it out, or I can get the minimum viable version of it into your hands and then make adjustments before we build out the full courseware. So we don't go down dead ends and we don't, run into brick walls. And so that's the other brilliance of beta. But I think the best part of all is you can create a story that evolves over time. I mean, stories over promotions. That's what I always say. So my best promotions have went the following way. I say, we're trying this new thing out. I don't know if it will work or not. If it works, oh my God, it'll be the next big thing. If it doesn't work, then you're only out X to give it a try. You in or not? Most people will not be in. A few people will be in. You take those people in. You come back to the same audience after it's concluded and say, listen, remember when I said this a couple months ago? I thought it was going to do X. Turned out it did X plus Y if it wins, right? So it was even better than I thought, but maybe I got lucky. So we're going to try it again one more time. Are you in? And now all the people that missed the first time, they see we're serious. So we get more of them the second time. And we get them in the right mindset too, which is very important. The consciousness of the person consuming the material is just as important as the material. So we get them at the deepest level of consciousness possible. And then if it wins again, then we can roll it out at large. Then I can go to partners and saying, this is the plan. The plan is we can tell the story of how this came to be, the inception point. We can share the case studies. We can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this thing is effective because it was trial by fire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when people want to use just technique to sell on webinars, that's fantastic. You should use as much technique as possible. But this is not the brain of the webinar. This is the heart and soul of the webinar. And so if I want to cook a better meal, I get better ingredients. And so that's the parting lesson I would give to everybody listening today is set yourself up so when it comes time to cook, AKA make the webinar, you have the best ingredients possible. And oftentimes that comes, I'm like always be launching in beta, baby. Beta is the new alpha as far as I'm concerned. It's my favorite way to launch. Yeah.
The title of your next book.
Beta is the new alpha. Yeah, that's good.
Well, you came up with it. But one thing you always talk about, Jason, is how there's some very important pieces of the webinar. But one of the most important pieces you talk about is the offer.
Yeah.
So talk about some of the components and structure of the offer. I mean, I've listened to many of your webinars, actually. It's probably the best risk reversal I've ever read or heard in my life. It was one of those e-commerce webinars. And
yeah.
The risk reversal alone, they could have not heard anything on the whole webinar. And they could have listened to the risk reversal and be like, I might as well buy it. I don't even know how much it is. Yep. I don't know what it is, but the risk reversal on that was the best I've ever listened to. So talk about some of the structure and components of the offer.
Yeah, it's there's 5 components of an offer. There's the core portion of the offer, what they think they're paying for. There's the price they pay. Then there's the bonuses, what they get for free when they buy the core offer. And then there's the risk that they take on when they purchase it. And then there's the scarcity of the offer. Is it limited or is it not limited? Easiest way to make something more valuable is to make it more scarce. So those are all the components of the offer. Most people will focus on there's 3 elements of those 5 parts. The 3 elements ultimately are money, time, and certainty. So people will buy it if it's the right price to value. That's the money component. If the time to put in there is worth it for what they get out of it, and if the certainty of success is as close to 100% as possible. And of those 3, certainty is the most important. People won't buy a $1 product that they have to spend 10 hours on if they have a 1% certainty of it being valuable to them. They won't buy a $1 product. They will buy a $15,000 product that they only have to put 1 hour in to use it, and they have a 99% certainty that it will work. And you could say, Jason, you saying everybody? I'm saying almost everybody. People that barely have 2 nickels to rub together will resourcefully find a way to procure $15,000 to purchase something if they believe that the certainty of it working is as close to 100% as possible. So everybody's focusing on the first 2 elements. How do we get the right value in there so people can see that, look at all this value compared to the price? How do we minimize the time and effort on the user's end to get to that result? And they always neglect the certainty. Almost all of my webinars have one thing in common, and that's they all have better than money back guarantees. Yet every marketer you pull aside almost none of them have ever made an offer that has a better than money back guarantee. And that blows my mind. Now you make it conditional. You don't, otherwise people will take advantage of you and they'll buy for the wrong reasons. But what you do is you try to create a better than money back guarantee that satisfies the following criteria. It incentivizes them to do what they should do anyway. So I'll give you a good example. Here's the most basic double your money back guarantee that we use. So this is a double. If you do X and you don't see Y result, not only will I give you your money back, I'll give you double your money back. That's the structure of it. And one of the things that we require them to do is every day in the morning, state their intention of what they're going to do that day with the program. And then every day in the evening, summarize and recap what they did that day. That's it. Do that for 60 days straight. Okay. Human nature, most people who buy courses, they cannot even comply with that simple request of 60 days of accountability. They just can't. No wonder they have trouble succeeding. It's hard, by the way. I empathize with them. But if I can incentivize you and give you another reason to be accountable like that, that's good for me. It's good for you. Now I can link that to a condition of the guarantee. If you do that, then I'll give you double your money back. And that's one of maybe 3 components that we ask for. So one of the other components is we ask them to go through, here's another one. Here's a really easy one in business. Set up your shopping cart, do a test purchase of your product, and show us that somebody, in fact, on the internet, you verified that it's possible for a stranger to buy your product. So when we teach info products, this is where I do a double your money back guarantee. So one of them is document your progress every day for 60 days. And another one is set up your actual shopping cart and put a product in there. The compliance rate on that is abysmally low, and that makes sense. In any impersonal offer you're making, the compliance rate is going to be abysmally low. But we're doing the things that people should do on their own anyway. We're incentivizing to doing the things that if they do them, then they will be successful and they will not need the guarantee. Because, if you do X in Y amount of time, if you don't do X in Y amount of time, then we'll give you the guarantee. But if you do X in Y amount of time, then you're happier because you've made more money than the double your money back guarantee would ever give you, right? So it's powerful because what we're doing is we're removing risk. We're not necessarily increasing reward. We're not necessarily adding value. We're removing uncertainty, and more people will buy because of the removal of uncertainty than ever will buy because of the possibility of gain. Everybody's all gain and no pain. I'm saying if you switch your focus to more pain and de-emphasize the priority of gain, put it in there, but make the reduction of pain more apparent, you will sell more. So in what instances do you feel comfortable offering a better than money back guarantee? If you can do that, you're the only one in the market probably doing that. And your customers will say, okay, I'll buy to fail. Because even if I fail, I'm still better off than I was not buying the product. And then watch them be shocked when they actually succeed on their attempt to fail. So they're just trying to get double your money back and they fail at it because they exceed the expectation and make even more money. These are the types of offers that make markets. These are the types of offers that launch careers and just churn you into an icon in your space. So the goal is, how do I create a better than money back guarantee that doesn't expose me unnecessarily, but shows the person that if you just do the most bare minimum of efforts required, I feel comfortable basically backing you, taking the risk on your behalf. It's the easiest, simplest, most powerful way I've ever seen to really, really juice up an offer. And I would love, obviously, get the book, read it, because there's a lot of ways you can do it wrong. There's a few ways you can do it right. But if you know those few ways to do it right, it's actually pretty easy to do a double your money back guarantee or a better than money back guarantee.
Jason, I just want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone, you have a chance to learn from Jason. It's a book. Go to his website, Jason Fladlien. They have free my 11 sales commandments. I've listened to countless webinars. So if you have a chance to opt in and listen to a webinar, there's huge value in just the webinar itself. And then obviously the next step. So I'll be looking out for the GOAT.
Jeremy, you just reminded me. We have 32 webinars that I've done or written that are in the GOAT program. Like the slide decks from 32 different successful webinars I've written over the last 15 years.
Amazing. Check it out. One to many. The secret of webinar success. Go to jasonfladlien.com. Jason, you rocked it out. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.